call this to attention. We have just gone live. This Learn Users group is actually being webcast at the moment. So this is something we've been doing for the last few years. It means that people who are not on campus today or would prefer to sit at their desks are able to join us. So hello to everybody out there. We do love to have questions during the presentations. I'm just going to draw your attention to this email, sssmoham@uwaterloo.ca. That will be the email address you can send questions to if you have questions for our presenters during the session today. So we have two people who are speaking with us today. Élise Lepage, who is from French Studies, and she's going to be giving us some insights into her use of ePortfolios in her courses. And then after that, we have Paula Smith, who's here with us from Math, who's going to be talking on how she's integrated Maple TA into her Learn course and give us some insights on that as well. Now, in speaking with Élise, she says she's feeling pretty relaxed about getting questions during the time that she's speaking. So if you have something you'd like to ask her and it feels like the right moment, just let her know. But we will, each presenter is going to be speaking for about 20 minutes, and then there'll be some time after each presentation to ask questions. So thank you, Élise.
All right, well, thank you everyone for coming. So I'm an assistant professor in the French department, and the course I'm going to tell you, well, and I should first apologize for my pronunciation. I've got my helping team here in case of problem. So the course I'm going to talk about today is a course that was the first time I was teaching it this term. It's called French 473 Aspects of French Canada. I didn't prepare any handouts whatsoever because everything is in French from A to Z. So I'm just going to rephrase and explain a little bit. And I should tell you a few words first beforehand about what is that course that because it's a bit special in our curriculum. Most of the courses that we teach in the French department fall either in the French grammar, linguistics, or literature category, but this one is one of the very few that doesn't. It's a course in cultural studies, which means that we study, pop culture in general, a bit of history, a bit of geography, anthropology, a bit of everything, okay? So it was already a bit well, not disturbing, but unusual to me. Okay, it was very challenging, but the best challenge I've ever had in terms of teaching. So this course, Aspects of French Canada, the goal of it is to teach students what is it like to live, to grow as a French minority in Canada. So we basically spent 4 weeks teaching French from Ontario, 4 weeks on Acadia from New Brunswick, mainly, and 4 weeks on Quebec, studying those various areas and their relationships. And most of the theoretical concepts that we study, well, the case studies are based in Canada, but most of the concepts like diglossia or the psychological effect that it has on the subjects are applicable on minorities elsewhere in the world. So for example, I had a student from Bosnia. For him, it was very familiar, and he had lots of examples from his own country. Okay, so that's what it is about. So when my colleague, François, who had been teaching that course for a few years, passed on that course to me, he said, well, that's a course with lots of love. And it is true. Well, I would rather phrase it as with a lot of, with a lot of spirit. So, and I attended a few classes of François a few years ago just to get a sense of what is that love or spirit that's going on into the course. And indeed, it's super important because you give a lot of yourself, lots of personal example, and you also get a lot from the students. So it's important to build that kind of very close relationship with them, that link of confidence, so that they can share stories that are relevant for the course too. So, and my goal in that course, I knew already probably half of the students just because they're fourth year and we're kind of a medium-sized department. our students have expectations and questions about those minorities or just about Quebec people. You know, why do they make such a fuss about this or that question? And our students kind of feel they want to express and discuss those topics. How come if they were born just 500 kilometers from here, they would feel so different about topics like religion or about student fees and so on? So my goal is that I don't want to convert them as Quebecers, but I want them to understand what's the background behind all those decisions. Okay, so it's to give them a deeper understanding of all that. Okay, so talking about love. So when I first conceptualized that course, I was like, well, I need a metaphor to explain that. There's a story behind that course. So, and I found a metaphor that I think both work in French and in English, to walk in someone's shoes. I want them to really try my shoes on and feel like, how is it to be a Francophone in Kitchener-Waterloo or in Hearst, Ontario, or in Shediac, New Brunswick? So I asked my research assistant to find me a picture of a rack of shoes, and she found a very clean and nice one, like the Christmas picture, and was like, that's great, that could do the job, but it's not the kind of feeling I want for that kind of course. So I just opened my shoe closet, took a sample, and of course it's not the nicest picture ever. They are as they are usually, but it already tells something about me. Even if I don't comment on that, there's already a little bit of personal investment in that picture. So, and that's what I told to my students. Well, I want that same kind of engagement. Like even if your, I don't know, informatic competencies are not at their best, well, try to make a step to get personally engaged into that course by sharing something. So that was my part of sharing. And that was an interesting thing. I also wanted the students to feel like, well, so they know that whenever they enter a French course, we don't want to hear a single word of English anymore. So just in terms of visual, I wanted to kind of reproduce that same kind of feeling on Learn. So I just tweaked a little bit the colors and did some little changes like that. What else? Okay, and so the main thing I introduced was the use of the ePortfolio. So I just adapted an assignment that François, my colleague, used to give, which is called the enquête culturelle, so the cultural quest, or it's a bit like a detective assignment. So basically, students have to do some research about 10 different topics. Okay, maybe I'll go on ePortfolio so that you can show that, you can see that a bit better. Okay, so this is my ePortfolio. That's empty. Okay, so I'll just comment first. Oops, and I didn't make the 10 elements appearing. But so they have to make some research about a region in Quebec, a city or a township, about an acronym. Okay, that speaks for itself. Good. There's a singer. There is a writer. A contemporary writer. A public personality, it can be a politician or someone who's in the media. Number 7, a person or a historical person or event. Okay. Number 8 is a recent movie. Number 9, what do Quebec people think about? It can be anything, from Stephen Harper to spending the winter in Florida to Don Cherry, whatever. Number 10 is find a picture or a caricature. So when talking about pop culture, that's what it is. And when I mention a contemporary writer, those are not necessarily writers that we would make them study in a literature course, but just writers who recently got a prize or in the media because they expressed their opinion on such or such topic. Okay, so that's what it is. And I've got that very big database because each quest is unique. So that means, for example, I've got 35 different writers because I've got 35 different students. So, and I update or plan to update that database on a yearly basis, just, well, to keep in touch with what's going on in the news. The only one little problem is that there isn't 35 region in Quebec. Or in terms of movies, it was hard also to find 35 recent interesting titles. So for some items, I had to kind of trick it a little bit. So the reason I wanted to use the ePortfolio was for two reasons. I wanted them to be able to share something and see what the other one were doing, but also because the ePortfolio is a neat and aesthetically speaking, you can do a lot of things. And so for those students who were ready to get involved, personally involved into the course, I found that they would have a great little toy to play with. And that's what happened. So, so the reason why some items have a little star in front is because they had to choose from those items for the first submission date that was at the end of February. So there were maybe 5 little starred items that were the elements that were fairly unique, where I found, for example, 40 cities, so they could write that in advance. And so they had to end in 3 elements at the end of February, and all the rest, the remaining ones, at the end of the term. And that's why some of them could have had the same movies, okay? But they weren't, I'm not sure they were aware of that, so I'll tell you the little tricks I had for that. It was kind of a big game for me to organize, and I just liked it. So, so the important thing to remember when you use ePortfolio is that, yes, students are always online, they're used to that, but at the same time, they not necessarily know how to play with that kind of thing. And they're sometimes not very much more advanced than we are in our use of technology. So what I did is that the second day of class, I asked them to bring their laptops or tablets, and we did an hands-on session in class. Now, Catherine or Cal can do that for you, but because I wanted to have that access to technology in French, I had the personal tutorial with Catherine and Kyle beforehand, and I organized it myself in class on the second day of class. So what I did, if you go into Edit, oh, I'm sorry, not there. Yes, that's where it is. So there are those 10 elements, and what I did is that I also built that me, myself, and I element. Actually, I should not be in Edit, I'm sorry. So I created all that template in advance, and the day before the first day of class, I asked, well, I can't remember if it was Catherine or Kyle, but to push that template that was ready-made for the students. So that was making their job easy. They didn't have to build the whole thing. There were already the spaces that were designed for them. So I just introduced myself, you know, my name, where I live, my native language, what other language I learned, how do I use French, what for, what does it mean for me, the different places where I lived, all those little details that are relevant for this course, okay? And basically what's in blue was part of the template and pushed to the students. So and during that hands-on session on the second day of class, I brought them onto the ePortfolio tool and asked them, well, can you just replace my information with yours? And during the evening, I just took the time to read everything, write a nice little comment, you know, to establish that dialogue. And it was very interesting already, the kind of resources that emerged from that first contact, because I knew half of the students, but I knew them, you know, if their students were getting good marks, if they come to your office hours, and so on. But you don't necessarily know where your students come from, if they've got another language, or about their story. So I learned lots of interesting things already. And for example, I found I had an Acadian student and maybe 6 or 7 French from Ontario. Well, resource, good. I'm going to have testimony. And I knew I had no Quebecois. So, you know, in terms of my expectations and what I can get from the group, it already tells me something. And it was nice to share that, and of course, all the students could see each other's profile. So, I don't know if there's any reactions so far, or... Okay, thank you, Charm. Okay. So I just would like to show you a few examples of what the students did themselves. So if I just go back to the ePortfolio. Honestly, I didn't plan to give any credits, any marks for commenting on each other's ePortfolio. And it's one of my questions, or maybe improvements, I'm looking forward to add for next year. Should I reserve a part of the marking to do that? Because I have no real sense if they did consult each other's. I knew that some did informally, but they didn't leave any comments on each other's ePortfolio. So that's one of the improving zone I could work on. So a first example is my student Karine. Oops, it's in the Explore section. So of course they can have fun changing the template. I'm not sure why she chose this one, but whatever. So she chose to put some illustration on her homepage. So a picture from Quebec City and a picture of herself as a baby at the Sugar Bush with her dad, who's a faculty here. So just a first involvement. So she filled, of course, the me, myself, and I page. And what else? She had, for example, for number 9, what do Quebecers think about Twitter and Facebook? So the nice thing is that visually it's very appealing to correct, and honestly I spent hours and hours correcting this ePortfolio. First because I was learning a lot of new things, but also because, oh, they gave me that web link, oh, there's that video embed, and so the course is going to be much, much richer next year. So they could do all kinds of new things, and for example, for that particular element, what do Quebec people think about? Well, our students don't necessarily have a lot of resources. So they go and interview Quebec prof from the department, you know, testimonies. Or, well, they ask their parents to contact their friends through Facebook. And so that's what she did. She cut and paste the kind of answer she got and commented on them. And they had to have a short bibliography for each element. So that's one example. Mylène did something nice too. For example, for the singer. Oh, so what? Oops. What happened? So first, well, as the home page, she just made a kind of a table of contents of what she was going to study. And for example, for the singer, she embedded a video. So I for sure know that she went and took the time to listen to some songs. And again, it's quite appealing. And as a prof, you can't escape the craving of pushing the button to listen to that. So, so there was that. And something interesting she did for the picture or the caricature, well, she placed a poster or of a big show that happens in the Ottawa region about the history of French from Ontario. And Mylène is originally from that region, and she was a volunteer a couple years ago. So it makes sense that she chose that picture because she was commenting on a cultural event that is totally appropriate in the course, but it's also related to our own experience. So like, okay, I was expecting something more recent, but it totally makes sense. So of course, I valued that. So in terms of, I was mentioning I was expecting, you know, that personal engagement from students. You can tell it did work in those kinds of example. And a last example maybe by Laura. So this was a fun one. And she was probably the first one on the first evening to just illustrate her own page with that image. I think I commented on that, and I just said, thank you for the beautiful pictures, Laura. Maple syrup. Well, the Paris picture, I'm not too sure what it was doing with Canada, but she had been on exchange, so it was nice. And again, for the singer, she made something quite interesting with a banner, then a picture, and inserting the kind of symbol of the group. So I find it was pretty appealing too. So those are just examples. So for my little trick about how much are they interacting with each other? Are they aware that some of them have to watch the same movie and so on? I wasn't sure. I didn't tell them anything at the beginning, just to see how the dynamic in the class was going to be. So what I thought I would do is that I would provide a discussion forum for them to meet that was not graded, not fairly only moderated. So discussion, okay, so that was this one. So they could post and share some information. So I just told them, well, if you've got that movie to watch, you could say, well, does someone have it so that I can borrow it? Or maybe, I don't know, if you have to comment on the city of Sherbrooke, maybe you'd be interested in reading the person who wrote about Estrie, which is the very region where Sherbrooke is. So it was a little bit disappointing. They used that forum, but for other purposes, like adding some stuff to the course. For example, when I talked about Acadia, there was that student saying, oh, I visited the Parc Evangeline, and she just put a link and some photos. One student did try at the very beginning. He said, well, the region I have to study is Outaouais and Gatineau, and I have to watch Starbuck. Anyone interested? Or someone at some other point said, well, I borrowed that movie from Waterloo Public Library. Someone wants to share it. And I'm not sure. Maybe they did gather together, but I've got no proof of that on the forum. So, and I guess it could change from one group to the other from years to years. So I think I'll implement that again next year as a side as an extra component to the ePortfolio, but I'm not sure how to best sell that to students or to make sure that they're going to make most of it. It's hard to tell if they're just discussing and sharing verbally between themselves in class, or if they need a more formal space like that. I'm out of time, I'm sorry. Okay, and just maybe as a concluding word, there's great things that came out of that course just because, for example, they had to read some very local newspapers from tiny little cities like Shediac in New Brunswick, not very appealing newspaper, but I took the initiative to email the editorial board of each newspaper saying, well, you know, we're 36 people from Ontario reading you every week, and my students are learning a lot. And the newspaper from Gatineau, Quebec answered, oh, thank you, Prof. Lepage. We want to publish your email. Thank you for your interest. Actually, I've got a better idea. Wait, I'll have my students writing what they think about your newspaper. So the students were, well, part very happy, I guess, but they were not showing it, and part, you know, complaining about that extra work. So I had them to write in Teams a few little lines, and we got published in La Gatineau, taking a picture in front of the blackboard and so on. So I think that in the end, they were very proud of what they did. But so, and that was not scheduled into the course. It's just because it came up because it worked so well. So thank you very much.
Contact here. So hopefully you're getting a picture of that. Does anybody have questions for Élise?
What was the town of the French Alps where you grew up?
Pardon me? Oh, pardon me?
What town of the French Alps did you grow up in?
Near Grenoble. That was it.
So you're not French Canadian?
No.
Oh.
And that's the big change because my colleague François is a true Québécois. Just by the look, you can tell he is. And you know, when he's telling about the political history of Quebec, he's just talking about his memories. You know, McGill Français in 1969, he was there and blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of interest for the students because it's living history, right? For me, it's a bit different because it's totally strange, but it works well differently just because I'm also an outsider. And, you know, I chose to live in Canada, not in Quebec, so kind of an intermediate.
Yeah. Anything else? Yep.
Oh, Constantine.
Élise, it's very inspiring. You talked about like comments between students. Do you think in future to introduce like separate forum for it, or just to use this comments feature of ePortfolios? Did students use this comments feature? Did they comment others' ePortfolios?
They didn't. So that's why I do think that for discussions, if you don't award marks towards that, that's not really going to work because I felt I had the best group ever. And I'm missing them. So if that didn't, and they know themselves very well and so on, so if that didn't work into that kind of group, I think it does send the signal that you do need to award some points for that. So I'm not, that's one of the questions I have to think over the summer for next year. Do I want to implement that or not? Like the image number 10 is a new element I added. I was like, well, I had some great result with this one, so I liked it. But I was like, well, maybe I should withdraw one element and instead award 10% of the mark to just comment on each other. My only fear with that is that this course is full, 35 students. It's a lot of corrections already. And when you do have to even mark the exchange between each other, could become endless. So. And I had some comments in the past in other courses where I had awarded some marks for the discussions online, and students complained about that. They said, well, it's not an online course. We want to have the discussion in class. And the discussions were working well in class. So there's pros and cons, and I'm not sure. Maybe I'll try 1 year, and maybe I'll go back to the first.
Thank you.
Thank you, Constantine.
Another question there.
Just a quick question. When you're marking the ePortfolio, did you just, you had a separate email to the students, or how does the marking?
It's super easy. And I'm sorry, and I logged out already. I should have shown you. Well, I had 2 Dropbox. So when they just submit the whole thing, do I have time to no?
Probably not.
Yeah,
Maybe
okay.
we can do that
Yeah,
afterwards
okay.
if you
So,
want.
and visually it's super because you've got the little frame where you can write the comments, and right beside it you can see exactly what I showed you. So it was fairly convenient. And you have to encourage students to submit that into this format and not a Word document that they couldn't paste, and it becomes very troublesome, and you kind of lose the whole point of the. Thank you, Sharm.
Great. Well, thanks very much.
Thank you very much,
Élise.
Jane.